The golden arches of McDonald's glowed against the darkening sky, their neon light flickering slightly in the crisp evening air. A low hum of conversation and the occasional rustling of fast food wrappers filled the modestly crowded dining area. Families, teenagers, and late-shift workers occupied the booths and tables, minding their own business, until the front door swung open. And in walked the First Lady of the United States. Melania Trump stepped inside. The air shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A hush fell over the room as heads turned in unison, eyes widening in disbelief. A mother holding her toddler mid-bite froze, the fry hanging from her child's lips. A group of construction workers at a corner booth exchanged stunned glances. Even the fry cook, halfway through tossing a fresh batch of fries into the oil, paused for a second too long, causing a loud sizzle to snap him back to reality. Dressed in an elegant, but understated beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses, Melania walked with the effortless grace of someone who was used to commanding attention. But this was different. This wasn't a red carpet or a high society gala. This was McDonald's. A teenage cashier behind the counter gulped audibly. His fingers trembled as he adjusted his visor, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This was Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, standing in his McDonald's, and she was about to order a Big Mac. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. The heels of her designer shoes barely made a sound against the tiled floor. With an air of quiet confidence, she approached the counter. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. Her accent, unmistakable, rolled through the room like a melody. The cashier, a pimply-faced kid named Ryan, opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, his hands gripping the register as if it might hold him upright. Melania's lips curved into a polite smile. "I would like a quarter-pounder. With cheese," she added thoughtfully. Ryan's brain short-circuited. He had never imagined a world where the First Lady would stand before him, asking for a quarter-pounder. His co-workers had stopped their tasks entirely, frozen in place like mannequins. "And medium fries," Melania continued, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "And a Diet Coke." There was a long, painful pause. Finally, Ryan found his voice. Would you like the meal?" he stammered. Melania tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "Yes. The meal." Someone near the back whispered, "The First Lady eats McDonald's?" The murmur spread like wildfire. "No way," a young woman in a hoodie muttered, nudging her boyfriend. "That's gotta be a look-alike." But it wasn't. It was her. Ryan, realizing his job still required functioning motor skills, fumbled at the register. His fingers slipped, and instead of pressing the meal combo button, he accidentally hit the large-size upgrade. He let out a small, strangled noise. Melania raised a perfect brow. "I am so sorry, would you like to upgrade to a large for only 60 cents more?" he blurted out. A tiny smirk touched Melania's lips. "No. Medium is fine." Ryan nodded so quickly it was a wonder his head didn't detach from his neck. He punched in the correct order, his hands still trembling. "That'll be, he checked the screen, then back at her. $9.78. She reached into her designer purse, probably worth more than the entire restaurant, and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. And that's when the first phone camera clicked. A flash of light. Then another. A wave of realization washed over the room. The spell of disbelief broke, and suddenly, everyone wanted proof that this surreal moment was real. Customers reached for their phones, snapping pictures, whispering excitedly. The First Lady. In McDonald's. Buying a quarter-pounder. Even the workers, though forbidden from taking photos on the job, couldn't resist sneaking quick glances. Ryan accepted the bill with what could only be described as reverence. His hands shook as he made change, nearly dropping a dime in the process. Melania accepted the coins with effortless poise and turned toward the waiting area. That's when the whispering turned into a ripple of admiration. "She looks amazing in real life. She's so graceful. She just walked in here like it was nothing." Even those who had never particularly cared for her found themselves intrigued. After all, it wasn't every day that the First Lady of the United States strolled into a McDonald's unannounced, ordering a meal like an ordinary citizen. Yet, despite the hushed awe, there was an undeniable tension in the air. It was the kind of charged energy that came when the unexpected occurred, when something felt too strange, too surreal to be real. Something was about to happen. Something no one in that McDonald's could have predicted. Melania Trump collected her tray with effortless poise, her manicured fingers grazing the smooth plastic as she lifted it from the counter. If she noticed the cameras flashing or the whispers surrounding her like a low hum of electricity, she gave no indication. The McDonald's crew stood frozen in place. The manager, a balding man in his 50s, hovered nervously by the fry station, unsure if he should intervene or simply let the First Lady enjoy her meal in peace. Melania turned, scanning the dining area. The customers, dozens of them, stared back, wide-eyed, their fries halfway to their mouths, their conversations forgotten. Then, as if she did this every day, she strode toward an empty booth near the window. The moment she sat down, setting her tray neatly before her, the restaurant seemed to exhale. And that's when people began to move. A mother with 2 young children nudged her son forward. He clutched a napkin in his tiny hand, his gaze flickering between Melania and his mother. "Go on, honey," the mother whispered. "Just say hello." The boy took a few hesitant steps toward the booth, then stopped. He swallowed hard, gripping the napkin like a lifeline. Melania, already unwrapping her quarter-pounder, glanced up. Their eyes met. For a moment, the boy stood frozen. But then, to everyone's surprise, Melania gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Hello," she said gently. The boy practically melted in place. His mother swooped in, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I just wanted to say," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "that we think you're wonderful, Mrs. Trump. My son, he wanted to meet you, but he's a little shy." Melania set her sandwich down and dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin, even though she hadn't yet taken a bite. She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the boy placed his tiny fingers in hers. "What is your name?" she asked. The boy, emboldened, answered, "Jason." "A strong name," Melania said, nodding. "It is nice to meet you, Jason." His mother beamed, snapping a quick picture. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Trump. You have no idea what this means to us." Melania inclined her head politely. "Enjoy your meal," she said, and with that, the mother ushered Jason away, her hands trembling with excitement. That brief interaction was all it took. The floodgates opened. One by one, people began approaching her table, respectfully, hesitantly at first. A group of young women, their makeup impeccable, held their phones close to their chests, whispering among themselves before mustering the courage to approach. "We just wanted to say," one of them began, her voice shaking slightly, "that we think you're, totally amazing." Melania took a sip of her Diet Coke and nodded graciously. "That is very kind of you." One of the girls let out a nervous giggle. "Can we, take a picture?" Melania glanced at the growing line of admirers forming near her table. She hesitated for just a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Yes," she said simply. The young women squealed in delight, scrambling into position. The closest one stretched out her arm, angling the camera. "Okay, say cheeseburger." Melania's lips curved into a small smile. "Cheeseburger." Click. The group rushed off, giddy, their whispers echoing through the restaurant. More customers stepped forward, offering compliments, some shaking her hand, others merely expressing admiration before retreating to their tables, their faces flushed with excitement. At one point, an elderly veteran, his worn cap displaying faded military insignia, walked up with a firm, respectful nod. "Ma'am," he said, "I just want to thank you for always standing with our troops. It means a lot." Melania straightened slightly, meeting his gaze with sincere appreciation. "It is my honor," she said, extending her hand. He shook it firmly. The admiration swelled like a rising tide. Even those who had been skeptical at first, those who had muttered, "Why is she here?" couldn't help but be drawn in. Meanwhile, Melania resumed her meal between interactions, taking neat bites of her burger, sipping her soda, her movements poised and controlled. She did not appear flustered or overwhelmed. She handled each approach with grace, responding in her signature soft-spoken yet deliberate manner. But as the admiration reached its peak, as people continued to shower her with compliments and hushed reverence, something else was brewing. Not everyone in the McDonald's was pleased. A figure, seated alone near the soda machine, sat rigid, their fingers gripping the edge of the table. Their jaw tightened as they listened to the endless waves of praise. Their eyes, dark with disdain, locked onto Melania. And just as another admirer stepped forward to shake the First Lady's hand, the figure pushed back their chair with a loud scrape, stood abruptly, and muttered through gritted teeth, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." The sharp screech of a chair against the tile cut through the McDonald's like a knife. Conversations died mid-sentence. The rhythmic beeping of fry timers and the rustling of paper wrappers suddenly seemed deafening. A woman shot up from her seat near the soda machine, her expression twisted in disgust. She was in her 40s, her faded blue jeans slightly baggy, her wild brown hair unkempt and unbrushed. But the most striking thing about her was the oversized, wrinkled T-shirt stretched over her frame. The words, "Kamala is our president," blazed across the front in bold, capitalized letters, like a battle cry. A harsh, mocking laugh burst from her lips. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she sneered, shaking her head violently, making sure everyone in the restaurant could hear her. The First Lady of the United States, just casually sitting in a McDonald's, eating processed garbage like she's one of us? The tension in the room thickened. A mother instinctively pulled her young daughter closer. The teenager working behind the counter swallowed hard, eyes darting to his manager, who looked too stunned to react. Even the construction workers at the corner booth, who had been laughing moments ago, had gone silent, watching the spectacle unfold. Melania, her perfectly manicured fingers delicately holding a fry, remained poised. Her face, an unreadable mask of cool elegance, betrayed nothing. But the woman wasn't finished. "This is a joke. This is a pathetic stunt," she spat, stepping closer. Her sneakers squeaked against the tile. "You think this is gonna make people forget who you are? That you're just some regular person we can all relate to?" She spread her arms, turning dramatically to the customers. "Is this what we've come to? Groveling at the feet of the rich while they pretend to be one of us?" Nobody responded. Some looked uncomfortable, others watched with quiet curiosity, but no one stopped her. The woman leaned in, placing both hands firmly on the table, her chipped nails pressing against the plastic surface. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "You and your dictator husband, living in your golden tower, pretending you give a damn about anyone but yourselves." A murmur ran through the crowd. A few younger customers pulled out their phones, their screens glowing as they hit record. Melania didn't move. She merely lifted her gaze, her expression blank, her posture as relaxed as if she were dining in the White House. The woman let out a dry chuckle, shaking her head. "What? Nothing to say? No snappy comeback? Or are you waiting for someone to feed you a line?" Melania took a sip of her Diet Coke, then placed the cup down with deliberate slowness. When she spoke, her voice was smooth, unhurried. "I do not yell like you," she said simply. The woman's lips curled. "Oh, how graceful! How dignified!" She mimicked Melania's accent mockingly, then dropped her voice into a snarl. "You don't have to yell when you've got an entire corrupt system doing your dirty work for you." The audience in the restaurant was split now. Some murmured in agreement. Others frowned, looking between the two women, unsure of who would strike next. The woman took a step back, raising her arms dramatically. "Tell me, Madam First Lady, when was the last time you actually did something for this country that wasn't just standing around looking expensive?" Melania picked up a fry and inspected it as though it were the most interesting thing in the world. "If you hate me so much," she said, taking a bite, "why do you care so much what I do?" The woman's nostrils flared. "Because people like you ruin everything," she snapped. "People like you stand on the backs of hard-working Americans and pretend to be our saviors." She turned, waving wildly at the customers. "Is this what impresses you? A rich lady eating a damn cheeseburger?" Some people shifted in their seats. A few averted their eyes. The woman's voice rose again, sharp and cutting. "You don't know struggle, lady. You don't know what it's like to work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. You don't know what it's like to be one accident away from losing everything." Her voice wavered slightly, but she caught herself. Melania observed her quietly. "You are very angry," she said finally. The woman let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, you think?" Melania reached for another fry. "Anger is easy. Anyone can scream." The woman's face darkened. "You smug little—" And then, in a fit of rage, she smacked Melania's tray off the table. Gasps erupted throughout the restaurant. The burger, the fries, the Diet Coke, all of it tumbled to the floor, the soda splattering across the tile like spilled ink. For the first time, Melania moved. She sat up straighter, her chin tilting ever so slightly upward. The woman stared, chest heaving, waiting for Melania to break. But she didn't. Melania slowly wiped her fingers with a napkin, completely ignoring the mess on the floor. Then, she met the woman's wild-eyed stare with a gaze of pure steel. "You have made your point," she said coolly. "But you still have nothing." The words landed like a slap. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. A slow, heavy silence filled the restaurant. No cheers, no applause, only tension thick enough to choke on. A manager, his hands wringing nervously, finally stepped forward. Ma'am," he addressed the woman in the Kamala is our president's shirt, his voice hesitant, "I'm gonna have to ask you to, calm down." The woman's fingers twitched. Her body was still buzzing with anger, but something had shifted. She had expected security to haul her out, for Melania to call for her team, for something dramatic to happen. Instead, she was left standing in front of the mess she had made, while the First Lady sat untouched, unmoved, unshaken. "You disgust me," the woman muttered finally, but the fire had dimmed from her voice. Melania merely arched a brow. "Then why are you still here?" For the first time, the woman seemed to have no answer. And for the first time, Melania smiled. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The entire McDonald's felt like it had been placed under glass, frozen in time. The fries, the crumpled burger wrapper, and the spilled Diet Coke lay scattered across the floor like casualties of war. The woman in the Kamala is our president t-shirt stood panting, her fists clenched at her sides, her chest heaving with adrenaline and rage. Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States, had not moved. She sat there, perfectly composed, dabbing her fingers with a napkin, as if the woman before her were nothing more than a mild inconvenience, a fly buzzing too close to her plate. The woman's eyes burned with frustration. She wanted to see something: anger, embarrassment, panic. But there was nothing. That smile. That infuriating little smile. "You think you're better than us," the woman finally sneered. Her voice was hoarse, but she forced herself to sound strong. She gestured wildly around the restaurant, trying to rally support. "Look at her, people. Sitting there like some goddamn queen. You're not one of us, lady. You never have been, and you never will be." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, but nobody outright supported her. Most people just watched, waiting. Some had their phones up, still recording. Melania set the napkin down. She finally stood. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. She rose with slow, deliberate grace, adjusting the sleeves of her tailored coat. She was taller than the woman by at least 4 inches, and yet she still looked down at her as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "You are right about one thing," Melania said, her voice smooth and unshaken. "I am not like you." The woman's lips curled into a victorious smirk, until Melania took a step closer. "You think anger is power," Melania continued, her accent giving the words an almost poetic rhythm. "You think that yelling makes you strong. That if you scream loud enough, people will believe you are important." The woman stiffened. "But all I see," Melania said softly, "is someone who is very, very small." The woman flinched, but she masked it with a laugh, sharp, forced, ugly. "Oh, real deep, Mrs. First Lady," she mocked. "Nice little speech. You practice that one in the mirror." Melania tilted her head slightly. "No. But maybe you should." Another flinch. The customers in the restaurant weren't clapping or cheering. They were watching. Some with admiration, some with barely concealed smirks, others in quiet awe. The woman shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how much smaller the room had started to feel. Melania continued. "You hate me because I do not scream. Because I do not beg for attention like you do. But your anger does nothing. It changes nothing. You think you fight for something important, but all you do is yell in fast food restaurants." The woman's face turned red. "Oh, screw you," she spat, her voice cracking. Melania smiled, just slightly. The woman's fists clenched again. She was losing. She could feel it, but she didn't know how to stop it. "I do not need to prove myself to you," Melania said, lifting her chin slightly. "I came here to eat a meal, not to argue with someone who has nothing to say." The woman opened her mouth, but Melania didn't let her. "If you want to be angry, Melania said. "If you want to yell, then yell. If this is your life, screaming at people you do not know, throwing food like a child, then you should continue." She shrugged. "It is not my problem." The woman was trembling now, whether with rage or humiliation, no one could tell. Melania turned slightly, glancing at the spilled meal on the floor. She turned back to the woman. "Clean it up," she said. The words weren't loud. They weren't cruel. They weren't a demand. But they landed like a gavel striking down on a courtroom bench. The woman's breath hitched. The McDonald's was so silent, you could hear the hum of the soda machine. Melania did not wait for a response. She reached into her purse and placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. "For the food," she said, addressing the stunned cashier. Then, with one final glance at the woman, she turned and walked toward the door. She did not rush. She did not look back. She walked with that same effortless grace, that untouchable confidence, that quiet, unshaken power that made the people watching believe in something, even if they weren't sure what it was. She stepped outside, where a black SUV was already pulling up to the curb. The door swung open. She slid inside without hesitation, her coat falling neatly around her. And just like that, she was gone. Inside the McDonald's, the woman stood stiffly in the middle of the mess she had created. Her hands trembled. Her face burned. A teenage boy near the counter let out a quiet, barely contained chuckle. The woman's head snapped toward him, and he instantly straightened, pressing his lips together. Then, from behind the counter, the manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm gonna have to ask you to clean that up." The woman swallowed. She looked down at the food on the floor. And for the first time, she felt the weight of what had just happened.